You're listening to NFT365, the first daily podcast on NFTs with your host, Fanzo, talking crypto, blockchain, Web3, non-fungible tokens, metaverse, and...
What the f*** is a non-fungible token?
We'll get to that.
I don't know. I mean, what is a non-fungible token? Actually, more importantly, what the hell are we doing around intellectual property? What are we doing around copyright and trademark? And this term being, CCO that is being thrown out there at the moment. And it's been out there for a while, but it's been all over my Twitter feed for the last, 12 or 14 hours or so. And we're going to break all that down. We're going to talk, and I will just tell you, this is like it's kind of like a hidden podcast episode here because I have a background in open source with the U.S. government and software that dates back to 2006 and some of the things that I've worked through in this space. So this is a topic I'm very passionate about, but I'm going to implore you to have an open mindset because I'm more so passionate about the overarching themes and what some of these dominoes mean than arguing about right or wrong or what makes the most sense in certain arguments or certain places. And for those wondering, I didn't immediately put a Moonbird on my shirt that, if you're watching the video here on YouTube, this is not a Moonbird shirt. This is actually a Hootsuite shirt. And it's actually just pure accident. I somehow got the second round of COVID and I couldn't sleep last night. So this is the shirt I just happened to put on. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Moonbirds, what Kevin Rose announced as well. But before we get there, we are sponsored by the Crypto Business Conference. Crypto Business Conference is a conference for those that are trying to level up on everything from Web3 to NFTs to metaverse to crypto coins. And of course, if you are a small business owner or entrepreneur, this is the conference for you. Definitely check it out. I'll give you some more details towards the end of the podcast. Now, we've been doing some throwbacks on mints and, different, Mint 365, all these projects that we're minting out. We have 98 days left. Yesterday, we minted the Care Bears. And I just wanted to share, the thing that we were doing differently, or what I decided to do on this one, was, with Care Bears, you mint a pack. So it's like kind of like a pack of like baseball cards, but there's only one inside of it, of course. And so some minting experiences, like blockchains like Wax, this is just common practice. Wax, you get a pack, you unlock it, you reveal what is inside. Most NFTs, there is just kind of like a static image, and then there's a reveal. But what I decided to do is rather than reveal the Care Bear underneath the chest that is in the NFT that we bought, I decided just to keep it not revealed. So whoever purchases the mosaic on November 11th of this year, and they get access to all 365 NFTs, they'll actually have the option. Do they want to hold on to it being not revealed? And I've shared this before. Like, I really love the gamification that kind of exists when we start to think about things. I mentioned like the Matrix, right? Do you take the red pill or the blue pill? Well, I like the option of not taking any of the pills and just holding on to one that still has that variable at its disposal. So that's what we did yesterday for Care Bears with Recur. And the Recur Pass is one of the ones that we are actually going to have Zach from the founder of Recur on the podcast upcoming. So we're going to break down a little bit more around Care Bears, around Rugrats, and around the upcoming everyone's favorite Hello Kitty, which I think probably my daughters might be more excited about that than anything else. But I'm pretty excited about, of course, the Care Bears, and anyone that listened to yesterday's episode heard that. But with that all being said, over the last 12 or 14 hours, and I just want to set the stage, but I can just promise you this whole talk isn't about what the Moonbirds did or Moonbirds didn't do. It's more about this entire premise of the Creative Commons 0, which is the CC0, which is what we're going to refer to. But just to qualify, this is not financial advice. I definitely recommend do your own damn research. And I also just say, just out of the gate, none of this is one size fits all. And I think that actually makes this partially the most complicated because, the fact that we still think of NFTs as one size fits all, like, hey, this project did it this way, why is this project doing it differently? Well, last time I checked, I haven't found, pretty much any projects that are identical, right? I remember people talking about, CryptoPunks and Bored Ape Yacht Club being so identical. Well, they weren't even close to identical before Yuga Labs purchased CryptoPunks, because for anyone that doesn't know, CryptoPunks, as far as intellectual property rights, the only thing CryptoPunks holders had was they could use their CryptoPunk as a profile photo. They could not build other NFT projects. They could not make a brand. They could not build a product business. And of course, with Bored Ape Yacht Club, we've seen things like Bored and Hungry, which is a pop-up restaurant. We've minted some projects here where it's the Bored Breakfast Club, which does coffee that is using the Bored Ape logo. And I say all of that because the idea of like what CCO is, or, the role of intellectual property in this space is not like a new argument, but I think there's a lot of assumptions that we've made or we've been, let's just say, neglecting in this space. And I will just first kind of clarify, I am guilty. I am guilty in the fact that, I talk a lot about the fact that the blockchain as a whole provides digital ownership. But really, the word ownership is probably part of the problem, because we shouldn't be actually referring to it as digital ownership, because what does really ownership mean as a whole? Excuse me, this COVID just keeps coming up. As a whole, because ownership, the premise of ownership, and I'm going to get to this whole CCO, I'm going to explain what I mean, but do you have to own something? Do you have to have your physical hands around something to technically own it or trust that it's what you say it is? And funny enough, for me, this was a huge topic of mine back in 2010, 2011, 2012, because I was helping companies move from on-premise technology into the cloud. And one of the things that I heard all the time was like, well, Brian, if we're buying the, cloud services, like, how do I touch it? How do I know where it's located? And I would always ask, well, if you can touch it and know where it's located, do you believe it's more secure? Do you believe you now have more ownership rights to it because it's physically in your building? But if I tell you that we are going to deliver this level of service, does it matter where those servers physically exist? And so, when I think about this whole piece, the first part I just want to talk about is just like, I think copyright and trademarks is one of the biggest hot messes that has existed in society since like the 18th century. Like the fact that, to understand like copyright law and trademark law, and I am not a lawyer, I do not play one on TV, I did not sleep at a Holiday Inn, but I will tell you, the understanding everything from, the laws and the regulations, but then also the implementation of the law and the regulation. It's, and I know this firsthand because I was 14 years old when my parents had actually, my dad had bought a frozen yogurt shop, and that frozen yogurt shop had a name that carried with it, and it ended up becoming something that became a little bit of and I wouldn't even say it was a debate, but a little bit of a discussion. I remember being really confused. I mean, like, we bought this business and we have this name and we're adding Fanzos to it, but then how does that change? And it was called Fanzo's It's Yogurt, and eventually we had to change it to called Fanzo's Yogurt because the It's Yogurt part was part of the issue. And funny enough, the people that were kind of fighting that or kind of pushing back on that, it wasn't even a long-term conversation. And so the first thing that we just have to say is that if you agree with the fact that copyright and trademark and intellectual property, like law as a whole, can be misinterpreted and interpreted differently in every state and every country, the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, do we need to fix that? Do we need to come up with a new solution and reimagine how we protect the things that we create? And if your answer is yes, okay, we're on that path. But then you also have to ask yourself, do I have to physically touch it or see it or believe it or physically have it in my hands to actually believe that I own something, right? That it is actually mine, right? Because interestingly enough, when we put money into a bank, into a bank, does anyone really even know? Like, I mean, that money doesn't stay in that individual bank. And like, what happens with that money? We just trust the fact that we put this amount in, and then when we want to get this amount out, we can get this amount out. We could argue if that's not even something that we should trust or a variable in this conversation. But where I want to take this is that the term CCO, and just to kind of bring everybody up to speed, Moonbirds, which is the first project launched by the Proof Collective, is it is a blue chip project. It's one that rolled out as kind of a blue chip, and then they had the Moonbirds oddities that launched as kind of like the next phase most recently. But it was rolled out under the Proof Collective group, and there's a lot of things that kind of go into that. Proof Collective was really built by Kevin Rose and Justin and a couple others that have done amazing things building some really large Web 2 brands, and what had happened was they launched 5 months ago with Moonbirds, and just yesterday they came out and announced that they are switching from to a CCO moving forward, as far as what the rights are for using Moonbird's art. Now, what is the CCO? Now, CCO is a Creative Commons 0 is the name of it. And it was actually something, it's an actual tool that you can opt in as the creator or the owner, the original owner of the art. You can opt in, and what it really does is it releases your rights, or it waives your rights as far as like your rights to having control around who can use that art for what, right? So in the sense of like right now, like in Bored Apes, like you have to own your ape, right? The thing happened with Seth Green. Seth Green is doing a TV show with his Bored Ape. Unfortunately, he clicked on a link and his Bored Ape was stolen. They had to stop the TV show. They couldn't have just picked any other Bored Ape in the collection and replaced it, because he only has that intellectual property rights of the Bored Ape that he owns. Now, we could argue if he actually does have those full rights, and I think we're still figuring that out here in the NFT space. It is definitely still the wild, wild west terms as far as what does that even mean inside something like Bored Ape, because how did that work when Old Navy bought the rights to one of them? And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but the whole CCO was created by the Creative Commons nonprofit, and their whole idea of this was like, how do we encourage and really purposefully let people build upon the art that is kind of put out there. And so this really comes down to like, we have like the little @ sign, and we have like the trademark registered sign, and then CCO. And so in my opinion, we kind of have in the NFT space, we have, the CryptoPunks pre-Yuga Labs version of rights where, hey, you can only use this, as your profile photo. You cannot use it in commercial or personal ways, right? Then we have like commercial rights being given to the holders of the NFT and saying, you can pretty much do anything other than like, hate speech or, there are some limitations. And then we have ones that have like, I would say some controlled rights. And I would throw VFriends into that one, right? Where VFriends want people to, Gary wants people to use the intellectual property of VFriends, but the caveat is you have to get their approval first, right? You have to go to them and present that kind of option. And there's some more fine details in that, that I haven't, done all the research on exactly how that process goes. But we've seen, there's like a vitamin company that came out using, a VFriends character that person owned. I've seen a couple others in their Discord. And then there's CCO. Now, CCO is not new. The most prevalent example of CCO is the Nouns project. And if you're not familiar with the Nouns project, it is without question one of the highest floor price, most successful NFT projects that are out there. And it's actually governed by the NounsDao. And the interesting thing on this CCO project is it also has the fact that it is not a finite supply. So the Nouns project is a project that is continuing to grow. And so it's a little different in how that works. But the variable in the Nouns success story is that those that own the Nouns NFT, they're the ones that have governance over within the NounsDao itself on making some decisions. So to me, like that's actually, and I'm going to tap into a couple other of the examples that are out there, including, one of my personal favorite, GoblinTown. GoblinTown is a CCO project. That's why we've seen, Goblin Kids, Goblin Girls, Goblin Daughters, Goblin Upside Down, New Goblins, Bad Goblins, Van Gogh Goblins, because it's CCO and anyone can build on any of that art or that property. But let's just take one step back, right? And so when my experience, I worked in the Department of Defense and cybersecurity for a decade, and what I was originally exposed to was the open source community in the sense of why is the government going with a commercial product to govern pretty much the largest network in the world, which is the Department of Defense, which has just on the the unsecured side 220,000 nodes or so when I was working there, right? And the question became like, why would we not want to open source and allow others to build upon and use the code that we're leveraging so that we can all kind of continue to innovate? Now, the flip side of that, and I know for some people, they're like, wait a second, if anyone can use the art, why the hell would I own an NFT? Well, that also came into the open source world because they would say, well, if we are putting out the code that we are all using, doesn't that give the hackers and the haters and the copycatters the ability to just take what we built and use the exact same thing? And so these arguments make sense, and they've been around for a long time. But one of the things that we have to start to look at is like this idea of what truly is, and I think this is where, like, to me, where this bigger argument comes in. But before I kind of step away from the Moonbirds conversation, Moonbirds 5 months in, Kevin Rose, put out the tweet. I have the tweet up here in front of me now, and he pretty much just laid out like some of the the components of what they're doing, and they said that Justin and Josh, the other two co-founder and president, the three of them decided to set Moonbirds and oddities free and embrace the CCO movement that allows any and all modifications to what we're built. In this new future, true ownership will be dictated by what is recorded on chain the way it should be, not by recorded house by a government or a corporate entity. And then it goes on to say the authenticity of Moonbirds will not come from lawyers enforcing trademarks, but rather be proven provenance and single source of truth via smart contracts. And so this came out on Twitter, and I will just tell you, there are people on all sides. Now, the first thing I just want to put out there is we have to be very careful where people's biases are coming in when they're making comments and thoughts on topics like this, because I talk about this a lot, but depending on how people feel about Moonbirds or Proof Collective or Kevin Rose and team, a lot of times we don't understand that, but then we see somebody that we trust, and we're like, oh, that's someone that we trust in the NFT space. I can't believe they have that stance. Well, we might not know that when Proof Collective rolled out, there are a lot of people that were bitter, that were, let's just say, Web3 influencers or crypto OGs that were pissed off because they weren't on the allow list, and they've been bitter and hoping Moonbirds would fail from day one. There are also others that are purists that are trying their best to hold on to the good old days, and they don't like when new people come into the space, or they don't like the way new people come into the space. And I understand all of that, right? But the evolution and the change and what this whole kind of world represents, you're gonna have to get used to the fact that we might disagree on how others are doing things within this ecosystem. But if we believe in some of the same decentralized principles and the idea of co-creation and really where this is all moving forward, then we have to also, give up some of these things that we were, kind of stuck in. And so that to me is like, I was clicking on some profiles and I was like, I knew before I looked at a couple of people's Twitter accounts, I knew that they were going to bash this news based solely on, I knew that they are bitter that they don't have a Moonbird or they weren't included in that project. So I'm just putting that out there. Now, there were plenty others that have very strong stances on all sides. Some of them are Moonbird holders. Some of them are not Moonbird holders. In full disclosure, I have not owned a Moonbird. I have not owned a Moonbird oddities. I had the opportunity to purchase a Proof Collective pass when it was under 3 ETH. And unfortunately just decided at the time that I wasn't going to pull the trigger. That goes into one of those what the hell was I thinking boxes. But I have no skin in the game. Zero skin in the game that on the project. What I will say is that I believe most of the discontent around what Moonbirds did is that it is 5 months after the project launched. And there are people that are making the argument on one side that are saying, why did the 3 executives of this project make this unilateral decision? If we are all owners by holding a Moonbird, shouldn't have this been something that the community had voted on to decide if they wanted to move CCO? That argument is also kind of built on the fact that if people bought their Moonbird believing that they were going to leverage and use the intellectual property as like the main, let's just say the main utility, then they kind of feel like they've been duped, right? Because they bought something thinking it was going this way, and now they've changed. Now, the truth to this all is there's a difference between what is ethically or morally or what they should have done and then what they could do, right? They have every right as the founders and the originators of that smart contract to make this change and make this pivot. Now, should they have kind of opened this up to the community and allowed it to be more of a vote? I mean, that's a tough place because, how do you give governance and how do you regulate governance, right? We've talked about governance being a big issue because you can't give governance to a one-to-one component in many cases because it just allows the rich to have the most power, right? Because then the whales who own, a higher percentage of the project, they will have the most, votes and the most power when those decisions are individually being made. And so the fact that, at the end of Kevin Rose's announcement, and I'll move on from Moonbirds here in a second, at the end of his announcement, he said, he simply said, the CCO does not cover trademarks, but they're excited to announce the upcoming formation of the Moonbirds DAO. This DAO will oversee licensing of Moonbirds and oddities names with the primary goal of encouraging general commercialization while preventing scams, hate speech, and violence. And so, I think the DAO makes a lot of sense. I actually reached out to Kevin Rose on Twitter and said, hey, I'd love to have you on the podcast to discuss because I would love to pose the question to him on does he wish that the DAO was something they created from the start? Because if the DAO was in place already, maybe this message is delivered a little bit differently. Now, with all of that being said, there's also been some other things that have happened within Proof and Moonbirds that some could argue, were things that where people were questioning on, how did some of the other co-founders or co-owners, jump in or jump out of the project? How were, some of the passes, put out there? But I think it's neither here than there. It is a project that is leading the way, and it's really sparked a really powerful conversation. Now, with that being said, like I mentioned, they're not the first. And one of the biggest names, artists in the, especially in the one-of-one space, who goes by Xcopy. Xcopy originally came out and said, hey, I'm going to turn my, his original one-of-one art, which was called Right Click and Save as a Guy. He was turning that CCO. And then eventually, more recently, he actually announced and said all of his art is now, he's now, activating it all as CCO. And so what does this all really mean as a bigger principle or, view? And so, I tap this back to kind of like the Microsoft and Linux days, right? Most people aren't familiar with Linux, or maybe if you are, you probably lived in my world, where Linux is an open source software, right? Where they shared openly and anyone could help build on top of or take and build their own versions of that software. Microsoft was the opposite, right? Microsoft had no one knew, you didn't have access, and they sure as hell would take you to court if you tried to build upon or a copy without their permission with what they were actually building. Now, if we take a step back and we think about what this podcast was built around, it's a simple mantra that we have here: we are greater than me. And so if we truly do believe that together we are more powerful than each one of us individually, it would almost make complete sense for us to move towards a CCO model where we are not adding that really this massive exclusivity limitation. And what I mean by that is, traditional art since the beginning of time was really just the rich people that bought things from artists, and then they stored them in the back room or in their bedroom, and really nobody saw it, right? And then eventually these things like museums came up where people would own art, but then they would put it on display, or they would allow a museum to put it on display, but they would still be the owners of said art. Now, if we way fast forward, we also just have to recognize that we've also lived in a world where artists have been stolen, stepped on, taken advantage of and not been, paid their dues or given, really the rights and the financial aspects that they've rightfully deserve, right? And a lot of that had to do with the fact that, the starving artist, right? And the artist just sells what they've created to make ends meet, and then that person can then make that art valuable by spreading it and making amplifying it, and unfortunately that original artist does not get anything in return. So when I take a step back and I think it's not really a Moonbirds discussion, it's not really an Xcopy discussion or GoblinTown or Nouns, or we can throw in the Toads, we could throw even in all the way back to Bitmap and some of the things that went through with that project and how they kind of rolled that out. But where I wanted to kind of us to think about this is, if we truly believe that Web3, right, the principles of Web3, and this is something I've been talking about with blockchain early on, right, is this idea of co-creation and interoperability, right? So the idea that everything should be able to work together, but yet we don't have to know everything about everything. Now, for anyone that's trying to wrap their head around this, if you think about it, what is the blockchain? How is the blockchain decentralized? Well, the beauty of the blockchain being decentralized is it comes down to the trust of strangers. Yes, you heard that right. The blockchain's decentralization is based on trust of strangers. And what I mean by that is there is no central location where all information is stored or can be throttled back and forth. What happens is that when you are making a transaction on the blockchain, there are computers. There is a computer that connects with another strange computer and allows those to connect to make that transaction happen, and then they disappear back in, and it's very it's much more randomized style solution here. So the beauty of this is that one computer is not talking to the same computer over and over again, or in any case, and this is really important from a security perspective, 100%, right? Like when we hear about like disappearing content, right? Like Snapchat, everybody thought was it's why people were sending let's just say inappropriate below belt photos on Snapchat. Part of that was because people believed it disappeared after 24 hours. Well, come to find out, for the 24 hours that it was created, it actually lives on a server somewhere in Snapchat. Well, that doesn't mean that it is actually truly, it's something that is actually fully secure, because anything that is living in one central location at any period of time, even if it's a couple seconds, is a vulnerable space for things to be taken advantage of. And so that's from a security perspective. Now, the flip side of this, and I will share, when I worked for the government, for all of the advantages that open source and building on top of things has, it also opens it up for the bad guys to be given equal information to what we are building, right? And if you give the bad guys, the same information, their job is just to find one hole and exploit it. The good guys or the good women or the good people that are creating have to make sure none of those holes exist, right? It's, I found out, as a dad, right? Like I have to think about a lot more a dad of girls versus a dad of boys, right? And it's the idea of like, do I have to think of one or do I have to think of many? And I say that kind of jokingly, but what I mean by this is that there are not only pros and cons, but we have to think about, okay, what are like our mission and our goal? Now, one of the questions you might be asking is, Brian, why the hell have you not talked about this for 266 episodes? Well, here's your answer. First of all, I believe that we are still working through what does digital ownership on the blockchain mean. I also believe a lot of the tech and applications that are needed for either one of these to survive, right? The applications that are needed for IP management on the blockchain, or the applications to or protocols to expand on the CC0 side, I believe they're still in their infancy. Like we can actually throw out for most people know that OpenSea moved to Seaport as their Seaport protocol. Well, Seaport protocol is an open source protocol. So it's one of the ones that we are now, that can now be leveraged. It's why we're seeing a lot more marketplaces kind of pop up as well. But the interesting part about that is OpenSea doesn't operate as a decentralized component. They're more of like, they have a decentralized front door and they use some decentralized protocols, but they're built on on the AWS servers and very centralized kind of backbone, and hence why they can stop somebody from trading on their marketplace, but they can't actually stop something from the blockchain because they have some centralized market functionality, but they can't do any, once it's on the blockchain, it's on the blockchain. So with that being said, like my lesson of learning and living in this open source world, since it was technically, I guess, since 2006, I think I started. I remember 2008, I spoke at the Red Hat Open Source Symposium, and I've done a bunch of work in that arena. But one of the lessons is not only is it not one size fits all, but it does come down a lot to risk versus reward, and then strategy and education. And so the other reason that I have not brought this up in previous episodes is I believe our education is lacking when it comes to wallet management, what the hell an NFT is, what the hell a smart contract is, or even what are the differences between Ethereum blockchain and the Solana blockchain, for example. And in that example, for those that are thinking through that, Ethereum is built in a sense of like a CCO, where they have allowed others to build on top of Ethereum. Hence why we have layer 2 solutions like Rally, which is where we have our ADHD coin, which of course you can check out at adhdcoin.com. And so I say all of this not to confuse you, not to rile up, the sides of this, but I will just say from my view, in the sense of we are greater than me, I believe us as a Web3 community have to come together to reimagine how do we provide governance and protection and shared in that like value back to the creator, while not requiring it to be a legal and a law type scenario. Now, I will tell you, when I decided finally to do this episode, I created like a 3-page. I mean, it's over 3 pages. It's probably 4 pages of a document, just coming from like the top of my head, of my whole opinion on this, the things I've learned, the things I know about the different governance and things that are out there. And so we're gonna have that up on the website in the near future. But I wanted to get this this episode out just so everyone can wrap their head around some of the things that are going on kind of in the world. Now I will say there are some people that are tweeting out about this could be the let's just say it could be the CCO summer, where last year was the DeFi summer, or 2020 was the DeFi summer. This could be the CCO summer, where we are moving much more towards this kind of view. But I will tell you, there are a lot of people that that are really one side or the other in this discussion. And here's the truth: if you are looking for 100% right on this issue, I don't believe we will ever move forward in a way that makes a difference in this world. And unfortunately, I don't know how confident I am that we can move past a black and white world right now, right? Like, I mean, heaven forbid, if you're in the United States, if there are some things about Republicans you like and some things about Democrats you like that is not allowed. In the world today, you must be red or blue. And if you're white, you're seen as like, you're indecisive because you're independent. And I don't mean colors, but I mean the political parties that we have here in the United States. But let's face it, a lot of people are very black and white in a lot of different hot button issues. And I believe in this issue, it cannot be a black and white thing, because there are some projects and some utility that are going to be built best for this one, for one of these answers. There are other ones that need to experiment and explore, what is possible in this whole world. Now, I know some people might be asking, well, Brian, you still haven't answered the question on, if I own a Moonbird, but everyone can create a t-shirt with any Moonbird they want on it, doesn't my Moonbird become worthless? That might be what your answer might be. Now, the answer to that question is actually no, and it's been proven multiple times already in the NFT world. Look at Nouns is a perfect example. Even look at GoblinTown, because one could argue GoblinTown's success was not only the fact that GoblinTown existed, but there were so many derivatives on OpenSea, in Twitter, people talking about all of these different projects, that all of that like overall sentiment had people coming back and saying, what is this GoblinTown that people are building upon? Now, there isn't, like, I believe, like, and we're going to outline this in the blog post that will hopefully help everybody out on this. I don't like arguing about just pros and cons or just talking about the problems on both sides. I like to focus on innovative solutions and creative ways that we can think about these things, right? And so I believe, one of the lessons that will come out of Moonbirds is like, how do we shift the core principles of like how we share or like what a project is after the project is launched? One could argue if Moonbirds came out with this at the very beginning, I don't think many people would be that up in arms. The other side of this is that we also have to understand that we can provide guardrails, and there's kind of like a gray area that we can play in where we can protect ourselves, but also allow people to build upon us. One of the great examples of that is Loot. For those that aren't familiar with the Loot project, the Loot project allows the builders to have some parameters and saying like, hey, you can add on to this, but this is what must stay the same, or these are the things that we are kind of governing. The other thing that I believe we're going to see is that for projects that are CCO'd, we need to just like we have right now. Like right now, we've built into our culture that a percentage of secondary sales goes back to the creators. Now, we didn't have to have that, but we believed that was right. Now, I believe as we look at CCO projects and derivative projects, I believe there should be a way that these projects that are building upon a CCO'd art are actually sharing value back to those original holders. So for example, if I was going to build something, let's just say I'm going to build the Moonbirds metaverse, and I'm going to create a Moonbirds metaverse for kids. What I believe one of the things that you could do is you could say, okay, we're going to drop this project, but every original owner of a Moonbird will get airdropped one of our NFTs out of the jump. So they will get rewarded one of those NFTs. And then I will also share with the DAO, that is the Moonbirds DAO, 1% or 2% of our secondary sales so that they can build up that DAO for the governance of those that are holding the NFT. I believe that's kind of like where we've moved when it comes to this idea of creator percentages. And so I believe we can look at this and say, how can we reward, incentivize, and help? Because here's the truth. This can only work if Moonbirds, it loves the fact that others are building on top of it and they help amplify it. Because the truth is, many of us are stuck in a freaking bubble. It's called the NFT bubble or the cryptocurrency bubble or the Twitter Discord bubble for that matter. And the truth is, for us to truly, get these brands and these businesses and these projects out to the masses, it can't be done by just a couple people on a team or 10,000 owners, right? It has to be something from like an adoption perspective. And if we want to sit around and wait 50 years like Disney, well, then we're no better than like the Web 2 solution. So I will wrap this by saying, hopefully I've opened your mind to kind of understanding, CCO is really just the idea of giving up the rights to the actual art and allowing anyone to build, commercial or personal, value with the actual art. So anyone could take a Moonbird, even if you own a Moonbird with a hat, you could build something with a Moonbird with a crescent moon above it, and you could build, a product or a service. You could launch a podcast with that as your logo, even though you don't own that individual NFT. But the piece of this that the other side of this also argues is like, well, then there's really no IP. Actually wrong. If you build a backstory or a derivative version of that, well, you can then have the IP rights around your version of it because you took a CCO'd piece of art and you created your own version of that, which then you can build protection around that as well. And so I am a big believer in the power of this moving forward, but we have to understand that A, we have to reimagine what ownership looks like. B, we have to also recognize that a lot of the applications, protocols, technology does not exist yet. But how do we make it exist? We need projects like Moonbirds that are now going to excite developers around the world to build, additional protocols and applications that make some of this actual activation a little bit easier. And then the last thing I will leave you with is I freaking love early adoption because this is what it's all about. It is about, collective debate and deciding, as a culture, what does this all mean? Because let's face it, a lot of the culture things that live in the NFT space are just things that we copied or borrowed from the crypto world. And I, for one, don't love everything that the crypto world stands for or what the crypto world was built upon. And if you do, I challenge you, go watch a show on HBO Max called The Anarchists. and it gives you a taste inside of that crypto world. I love the show itself. There's a lot of the principles, some of the principles of that show I love. But the insights into the crypto world, it's going to blow your mind. And so I believe the best thing that can happen of this is collaboration, a little bit of competition, and hopefully a collective view on if we believe decentralization, we understand the principles of Web3, then we must figure out how to reimagine the ways of the old so we're not stuck dealing with this ridiculous area of regulations through trademarks and all the nonsense that exists today. So hopefully that opens kind of your mind to what's possible. We of course will get the blog post out there. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about it. I'm sure I'll be talking about it in some Twitter Spaces in the near future, and I would love the opportunity to talk to some of the founders of some of these big projects that have deployed it, because I would love to ask them some very poignant questions, because I have a lot of history in this open source space, and I think there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of questions to ask. Finally, of course, we are sponsored by the Crypto Business Conference. You can check out the Crypto Business Conference I just hit the wrong button on my video. It is at socialmediaexaminer.com/NFT365. I'm super excited for the event, and I'm actually excited to have this type of conversation around some of the networking tables, maybe in some of if you come visit our booth at the event. And I'll probably mention something about CCO in my keynote on day 2 at Crypto Business Conference. So hopefully I will see you there at that event. Definitely go check that out. It's going to be a heck of a lot of fun. And finally, I will just say, remember that we are greater than me. But the first principle, the first step in that mantra is that you must first become and work on being the best me that you can be. If some of this was over your head or some of this was too much, and you're like, Brian, I'm confused, there's a hashtag we use. It's called DYODR. Do your own damn research. Go out there and Google. Go out there and research. Go out there and ask people's questions. Post tweets to Kevin and see what they say. I really do believe that we can learn, we can listen, and we need other people's opinions and views. We need you to poke holes in some of these philosophies, because that's really truly the only way that we will innovate. But I believe the future of innovation will be powered by open collaboration. So until tomorrow, my friends, make it a great day. Cheers.